The crowbar slipped through Nora's numb fingers and clattered against the floorboard. She stared at the metal box wedged beneath the shed's rotting floor, its surface thick with rust but intact. Her breath fogged in the February cold. 3:47 a.m. She'd been prying up boards for an hour, looking for anything. Insulation, cardboard, plastic sheeting, something to block the wind screaming through the walls. She hadn't expected to find a box. And she definitely hadn't expected what was inside. 12 hours earlier, get out. Nora looked up from the couch. Her sister Vanessa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face set in that expression Nora knew too well, the one that said the decision was final. Van, it's midnight. Can we talk about this in the morning? We talked about it last month. And the month before. You're 32 years old, Nora. You can't sleep on my couch forever. I'm working. I'm paying you what I can. $200 a month. That doesn't even cover groceries. Vanessa's voice was sharp, brittle. Brad and I are trying to start a family. We need space. We need privacy. We need you gone. Brad appeared behind her, arms full of Nora's clothes, everything from the hall closet dumped into garbage bags. We're not trying to be harsh, he said, not meeting her eyes. But we've been more than patient. Patient. They'd been patient for 4 months, since the landlord had changed the locks on Nora's apartment while she was at work. She'd come home to find her belongings in boxes on the sidewalk, an eviction notice taped to the door. Turns out you can't pay rent when your employer restructures, your department out of existence, and your severance runs out in 6 weeks. Where am I supposed to go? Vanessa's face softened, but only slightly. Maybe call Mom. Or there's that shelter on Franklin Avenue. Mom remarried. Her husband made it clear I'm not welcome. Nora stood up slowly, pulling on her jacket. Her hands shook. And the Franklin shelter has a 3-month waiting list. I checked. Then figure something out. You always do. Vanessa held out 2 more garbage bags. I'm sorry. I really am. But this is for the best. Nora tipped the bags. She walked past her sister, past Brad with his carefully neutral expression, out into the February night. The door locked behind her with a soft, final click. She stood on the sidewalk, for garbage bags at her feet, and checked her phone. Bank account, $23.14. Gas tank, quarter full. Credit cards, maxed out months ago. Friends she could call at midnight. 0. Everyone had their own problems. Everyone had already helped once, twice, as many times as they could manage. She loaded the bags into her 2001 Civic and started driving. No destination, just away. The shed appeared in her headlights like a memory she'd forgotten she had. Grandpa Ed's property, 12 acres of scrubland 40 minutes outside the city, left to all 3 grandchildren in the will. Vanessa and their brother Marcus had wanted to sell immediately. Nora had argued to wait, see if the market improved. They deadlocked at the lawyer's office, and the property sat, and used, and unwanted. The main house had burned down 6 years ago, electrical fire, total loss. But the shed remained. Grandpa Ed's workshop, where he'd spent 30 years as a carpenter, building furniture that now cluttered thrift stores and estate sales. Nora parked and forced the shed door open. Inside was exactly what she remembered. Workbench, tools thick with rust, sawdust coating every surface. Freezing cold. No electricity. But it had walls and a roof, and no one would find her here. She hauled her bags inside and assessed the space by phone flashlight. The window was broken. She stuffed it with a trash bag and duct tape. The door didn't lock. She wedged the workbench against it. The floor was warped, gaps between the boards wide enough to see the ground below. That's when the cold really hit her. Wind whistled up through those gaps, cutting through her jacket and 2 sweaters. She'd freeze by morning. She grabbed the crowbar from Grandpa Ed's tool rack and started prying up boards, looking for something to stuff the gaps. Old newspapers, maybe, or foam, or the crowbar punched through a rotted board and hit metal. Nora froze. She pried up the adjacent board, then another. A metal box, roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, sat in the space beneath the floor. A lockbox, the kind you'd buy at an army surplus store. She dragged it out. Heavy, incredibly heavy, and set it on the workbench. No lock, just a latch, rusted shut. She hammered at it with the back of the crowbar until it broke. The lid opened with a shriek of metal. Inside were stacks of paper, yellowed and brittle. Nora lifted the top sheet. Her hands started shaking. Stock certificates. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Names she recognized: IBM, Xerox, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, all issued to Edward Chun, her grandfather. The earliest ones dated from 1962. Nora's phone battery was at 8%. She took photos frantically, the certificates, the names, the dates, the sheer quantities. Her mind couldn't process the numbers. One Apple certificate, 10,000 shares, purchased 1982. She Googled with shaking fingers. Apple stock split history. That 10,000 shares, after multiple splits, would now be worth. Her phone died. Nora stood in the dark shed, surrounded by garbage bags and rust, and 60 years of stock certificates, and started laughing. The sound echoed off the walls, slightly hysterical, slightly desperate. She'd been kicked out at midnight with $23 to her name, and she was standing on a fortune. At 6 a.m., Nora sat in the public library parking lot, waiting for it to open. She'd charged her phone enough to make one call. To Marcus. "Do you know what time it is?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Did Grandpa, Ed, ever mention investments? Stocks? What?" "Nora, it's 6 in the morning. Just answer. Please." Silence. "Then, he bought stock." "Yeah. Mom used to complain about it. Said he wasted money on certificates instead of helping her with college." "What?" "I found them. In the shed." "Marcus, there are thousands of certificates. Worthless paper. He bought cheap stock in companies that probably don't exist anymore. Mom checked once, years ago. She said it was all defunct. Did she check all of them? I don't know. I was 12. Look, I've got a meeting at 8. I need you to not tell Vanessa yet. Can you do that?" "Tell her what?" "Just don't mention this conversation. Please." Marcus sighed. "Fine. Whatever. Can I go back to sleep now?" Nora hung up and waited. At 7 a.m., the library doors opened. She was the first one in, claiming a computer terminal in the back corner. She pulled up the photos on her phone and started researching. If you're following Nora's story, subscribe now, because what she discovers next will change everything. By noon, she'd documented 47 certificates. 33 were for companies that still existed. Of those, 14 had split multiple times over the decades. She pulled up a stock calculator and started entering numbers. 10,000 shares of Apple, purchased 1982 at 39 cents per share. Current value $4.7 million. 5,000 shares of Microsoft, purchased 1987 at 97 cents per share. Current value $8.2 million. 2,000 shares of Amazon, purchased 1998 at $1.96 per share. Current value $13.1 million. Her hands shook so hard she had to stop typing. People walked past, library patrons, college students, a homeless man who smelled like cigarettes. Normal people having normal days. Nora kept calculating. By 2 p.m., she'd worked through half the certificates. Conservative estimate, $127 million. And she still had half the box to go. She called the first name that appeared when she Googled stock certificate authentication. Friedman and Associates, Financial Verification Services. "My grandfather left stock certificates. I need to know if they're real." The receptionist connected her to a senior analyst named David Park. Nora explained everything. The shed, the box, the quantities. She emailed photos. 10 minutes later, Park called back. His voice was very careful, very controlled. "Ms. Chun, these appear to be authentic vintage certificates. To properly authenticate and transfer ownership, we'll need the physical certificates, proof of death, proof of inheritance, and clear chain of title. Can you bring them to our office?" "How long will it take?" "For this quantity? 6 to 8 weeks for full authentication and transfer." "But Ms. Chun, I need you to understand. If these are genuine, you're looking at one of the largest undiscovered stock holdings I've encountered. The Apple and Amazon certificates alone." "How much?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "I've done preliminary calculations on the 47 you documented. Accounting for splits and current market value, we're looking at approximately $298 million. The library spun. Nora gripped the desk. "Miss Chun, are you there?" "I'm here." She forced breath into her lungs. "I'll bring them in. Tomorrow. I'm clearing my schedule. And Miss Chun, don't tell anyone else about this yet. For security reasons." Too late. She'd told Marcus. But Marcus didn't believe her. Thought they were worthless. That was fine. That was safe. She drove back to the shed in afternoon light. the box of certificates now locked in her truck. The property looked different, not abandoned and forgotten, but valuable. 12 acres. Grandpa Ed had owned 12 acres of land that Vanessa and Marcus wanted to sell for pennies. Inside the shed, she spread out a sleeping bag she'd bought at Goodwill for $8, leaving her with $15.14. She ate a protein bar for lunch, and another for dinner. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Vanessa. No voicemail. Probably wanted to make sure Nora hadn't done anything dramatic like shown up at their office or called their mother. As if Nora was the problem. She lay in the sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling. Grandpa Ed had been a carpenter. He'd built furniture for 40 years. He'd lived in a small house, driven an old truck, worn the same jacket until it frayed. And all the while, he'd been sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars. Why? Nora thought about her mother's complaints, the ones Marcus had mentioned. He wasted money on certificates instead of helping with college. What if it wasn't waste? What if Grandpa Ed had seen something no one else did? That those certificates would grow, that patience would pay off, and he'd left the property to his grandchildren. All of them. Equal shares. Which meant the certificates belonged to all of them too. Nora's phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Mom called. She heard he got kicked out. She says the shelter on Franklin has emergency beds. You should try there. Nora deleted the message. She pulled the sleeping bag tighter and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd go to Friedman and Associates. Tomorrow she'd start the authentication process. Tomorrow she'd figure out what $298 million actually meant. Tonight, she just needed to survive the cold. But for the first time in 4 months, she wasn't afraid. She was angry. And anger, she was learning, was a much more useful emotion than fear. David Parks spread the certificates across the conference table like they were religious artifacts. In a way, Nora supposed they were. Remarkable, he murmured, examining a Xerox certificate dated 1964. Your grandfather had extraordinary instinct. He bought companies on the verge of transformation. He was a carpenter, Nora said. I don't understand how he even knew. He read. Park gestured to a notation on one certificate. See this? He wrote the date and reason for purchase. IBM expanding computing. Future is electric. He was studying market trends, technological advancement. He was a futurist. Over the next 2 hours, Park's team photographed, cataloged, and authenticated. They verified Grandpa Ed's death certificate, the will, the property inheritance. They traced chain of title. They contacted transfer agents and verified the certificates hadn't been reported stolen or fraudulently reproduced. By 4 p.m., Park sat across from Nora with a folder. Final authentication, 218 certificates representing shares in 63 companies. Current market value, $298.4 million. Miss Chun, you're an extremely wealthy woman. The property was left to 3 people. My sister, my brother, and me. Equal shares. Park's expression shifted. Then legally, the contents of that shed belong to all 3 of you. You'll each receive approximately $99.5 million, minus taxes and transfer fees. Nora nodded. She'd expected this. Wanted it, even. She wasn't Vanessa. She wasn't going to take everything and leave her siblings with nothing. But she also wasn't going to let them forget who found it. She called Marcus first. Remember those certificates I mentioned? They're real. They're worth $298 million. Your share is $99.5 million. Silence. Then, this is a joke. I'm at Friedman and Associates right now. They've authenticated everything. I'll email you the documentation. You'll need to come in to sign transfer papers. Nora, if this is some kind of, it's not. Check your email. I'll talk to you later. She hung up and dialed Vanessa. Her sister answered on the first ring. Nora, look, I feel terrible about last night. Brad and I talked, and if you really need a few more days, I found Grandpa Ed's stock certificates. In the shed. They're worth $298 million. Your share is $99.5 million. You'll need to come to downtown to sign papers. What are you talking about? Check your email. Marcus can explain. I have to go. She hung up before Vanessa could respond. Park watched her with something like admiration. You could have said nothing. Kept it all. The certificates were found on jointly owned property, but you were the sole discoverer. There would have been legal avenues. My grandfather left that property to all 3 of us for a reason. I'm not going to betray that. Nora stood. How long until the transfer's complete? 8 weeks. We'll set up accounts, handle the tax implications, coordinate with the transfer agents. You'll need to hire a financial advisor, probably a lawyer. This is complex. I need an advance. Is that possible? Hark smiled. Against an inheritance this size? Absolutely. How much do you need? 3 days later, Nora stood in the rental office, signing a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment. Real hardwood floors. Working heat. A kitchen that didn't double as a bedroom. The security deposit barely dented the $50,000 advance. She furnished it simply: bed, couch, dishes. She bought a winter coat that actually fit. She paid off her credit cards. She sat in her new living room and felt nothing like triumph, nothing like joy, just exhausted relief. Marcus called first. I signed the papers. Nora, I don't know what to say. Grandpa Ed knew what he was doing. He bought those stocks for a reason. Did he know? I mean, did he know what they'd be worth? I think he knew patience pays off. I think he knew that things other people dismiss might be valuable. She paused. Sound familiar? Marcus was quiet. Then, I'm sorry. For not believing you. For not helping when you needed it. You had your own life. I get it. Still, I'm sorry. Vanessa didn't call. She texted 3 weeks later. Papers signed. Thank you for telling us. I hope you're doing okay. Nora didn't respond. Maybe someday they'd rebuild their relationship. Maybe not. Right now, she had other priorities. She established the Edward Chin Foundation, dedicated to financial literacy and housing security. First initiative, emergency grants for people facing eviction. Second, stock market education for low-income families. She wanted people to understand what Grandpa Ed had understood, that wealth could be built slowly, patiently, by seeing value where others saw risk. She hired a team: lawyer, accountant, financial advisor. She bought Grandpa Ed's property from her siblings. They sold their shares happily, eager to convert everything to liquid cash. She rebuilt the main house exactly as it had been, using Grandpa Ed's original blueprints. She kept the shed intact, floorboards and all, as a reminder. 6 months after that midnight eviction, Nora sat at the rebuilt house's kitchen table, reviewing foundation applications. A single mother in Chicago facing eviction. A laid-off teacher in Phoenix. A veteran in Atlanta whose disability payments didn't cover rent. She approved them all. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, family dinner this weekend? My treat. She smiled and typed back. I'll be there. Then Vanessa, can we talk? I'd like to apologize. Really apologize. Nora stared at the message. Vanessa had received $99.5 million for doing nothing except being born into the right family. She'd kicked Nora out at midnight and suggested a homeless shelter. She'd spent years dismissing Nora as the family failure. But she was still Nora's sister. And people could change. Nora typed, coffee next week? The response came immediately. Yes. Thank you. That night, Nora walked out to the shed. She sat on the workbench where she'd opened that metal box, where her life had split into before and after. The floorboards were still loose where she'd pried them up. She could see the empty space beneath. Grandpa had hidden $298 million under these boards and never told anyone. He'd lived modestly, worked until he died, left his fortune buried like a secret. Why? Nora thought she understood now. It wasn't about the money. It was about knowing that value exists even when invisible. It was about patience and faith and trusting that good instincts, given time, bear fruit. He'd left the property to 3 grandchildren because he'd wanted them to figure it out together. To choose whether they'd fight over scraps or build something meaningful. Nora had chosen to build. She locked the shed and walked back to the house. Her house now, filled with light and warmth. Her phone showed her bank balance, $94.7 million, after the foundation funding and property purchase. An incomprehensible number. But the number that mattered more was different. 247 families housed through emergency grants. 1,200 people enrolled in financial literacy courses. 0 evictions for program participants. She made tea and sat at Grandpa Ed's old kitchen table, the one piece of furniture she'd recovered from storage. She ran her hand over the wood he'd sanded smooth, and she whispered, I figured it out. Thank you. Outside, stars emerged over the property. Inside, the house was warm. And Nora Chun, who'd been kicked out at midnight with $23 and 4 garbage bags, finally allowed herself to believe. She was home. She was safe. And she'd never be invisible again.